We are going into the last section then of the Dzogchen book by the Dalai Lama today, and looking at the Afterward, which starts on page 201, A Gift to the World. This is not by the Dalai Lama. This was a teaching given after one of the Dalai Lama's sessions by Nyoshul Khenpo. And so I wanted to just highlight a few of these things. I think that he has a lot of good things to say and a very general overview of some of this that can be helpful to us. He was born in 1932 in Kham, the same place where our own spiritual director was born, and lived for a while. And then, so he had the teachings of the Longchen Nyingtek, and his lineage goes back to the primordial Buddha, as all the Dzogchen lineages do, and lists some of his various teachers there. He wrote a book, The Definitive History of the Dzogchen Nyingtek. His disciples regarded him as Longchenpa in the flesh. He passed away in France in August of 1999. He was one of Sogyal Rinpoche's most beloved masters, and during His Holiness's teachings in San Jose, he gave this teaching the evening of the 8th of October. The translator was Richard Barron or Chukinima. So this gift to the world, he talks about his appreciation to Sogyal Rinpoche, who himself is recognized as an incarnation of one of the close students of Padmasambhava. So is Khenchen Lama, our spiritual director, is also recognized as one of those 25 disciples. There are various levels and vehicles of Buddha Dharma. The stage of an arhat through the practice of fundamental vehicle, stages of great bodhisattvas through Mahayana practice, and the stage of a siddha or realized saint through Vajrayana or tantric practice. So roughly 1,000 years ago, this tradition of Buddhism came to Tibet during the reign of King Trisong Detsen. He invited various scholars and teachers from India, China, and other areas where they engaged in the task of translating the whole heritage of Buddhism into the Tibetan language. The introduction to Buddhism ushered in a millennium of peace and benefit for the Tibetan people. He talks a little bit briefly about Milarepa, Longchenpa, Tsongkhapa, Sakyapandita, and so forth, other great individuals as a part of that period of time, that millennium. We think of our tradition of Buddhism as a gift we have to offer the world, and that we, the teachers of Buddhist tradition, would ask is that you accept our offering, enjoy it, make use of it, and benefit from it. What is this gift? It's nothing more or less than our own mind. There is no Dharma beyond our own mind. This thing we call mind has never had a point of origin throughout beginningless time. There has been a thread of consciousness, a continuum, moment after moment, up to the present instant and on into the future. We experience mind as a continuous flow of thoughts and emotions. Some of these are tinged with desire and attachment, some with pride, some with aggression and anger, some with jealousy, envy, or hatred. But there is continuous turmoil of thoughts, concepts, and emotions churning away in our minds moment after moment, day after day. Day and night, sorry. Some of these things we think with our waking consciousness are useful and bear fruit, while others are simply a waste of time. Perhaps the greatest fundamental cause of our suffering, the ongoing pain, suffering, and frustration we feel day in, day out, is the unrelenting activity of our mind. This brings us right back to the practice of Dharma. All of us seek a state in which our mind abides in peace. Our mind, far from being peaceful, is often very wrathful and constantly obsessed. From the point of view of Buddhism, Buddhist cosmology, the 6 states or classes of beings in samsaric existence, one example is the hell realms. Extreme agony on the account of the intense heat or cold is a direct cause from anger in our own mind. There is a connection that we can see. Whenever you get angry, you feel hot all over, you get red in the face, the environment is on fire, an environment that is totally destructive and totally hostile. We should not consider this an external place to which people are sent as punishment. It is a distorted appearance or projection of the minds of beings in those states. So it's more of a psychological view of these things rather than a physical place. It's our mind that is those places. So we can all be in all of these 6 states. So we have good reason to learn how to calm our minds and cultivate a state of tranquility where the mind can simply rest and abide in a state of peace. This is where Buddhism can be of such great help. We can discipline ourselves to train and transform our own mind. No one else can do this for us. Otherwise, we find ourselves very helpless when we experience personal suffering, which we all do. When some tragedy befalls us, instead we resort to strategies which are self-destructive, like drinking to oblivion, drugs, and so forth. People do this to themselves in order to try to stop thinking, trying to escape their pain. The whole purpose of the Buddhist teachings is to provide an alternative. Let me give you a very brief overview of the Buddhist teachings as I understand them, he writes. There seem to be 3 different approaches: Madhyamaka, Mahamudra, and Dzogchen. All of these have a common root, the root jhana, or fundamental vehicle. This involves a recognition that all the suffering we experience as an individual and has its root in the mind. Perhaps the greatest stumbling block to true happiness is our misconception, our self or ego, where we take the mind or body or the mind-body complex to be a single eternal entity in and of itself. When we begin to examine both intellectually and through the practice of meditation, we can determine that the body, composed of smaller elements right down to the subatomic level, we can begin to see how our mind-body aggregate is just that, an aggregate, a compound of different elements, rather than some definite entity in itself. Then we begin to understand the physical body as something composite, impermanent, and lacking any self-nature of its own. When we begin to examine our minds, we begin to determine both intellectually and eventually through direct experience that mind per se is not a thing in and of itself. What we are discussing has no origin, no cessation, and cannot be localized or described in any ordinary conceptual terms. This analysis is known as the cultivation of prajna, or wisdom, and aims to arrive at a deeper insight and wisdom into the nature of reality. Linked with this, though not quite the same, is the cultivation of samadhi, a deep state of meditative absorption, where mind can settle into a state of calm. Then, as a support element, there is the training in sila, ethics, morality, and discipline. These 3 higher trainings of wisdom, meditation, and ethics constitute the fundamental vehicle of Buddhism and underlie all of the different approaches and jhanas of Buddhism. That's why I go through all of those 3 jhanas in each of those fundamental vehicles or paths in my book on innate happiness. When we examine all the different elements of our experience, all the phenomena in the world around us, we can determine that the individual personality lacks any true nature, and in the same way, each and every entity or phenomena we encounter lacks a self-nature. We arrive at the conclusion that all phenomena are empty. Emptiness pervades not only our own individual ego or sense of self, but the whole of reality. This is the Madhyamaka approach of the middle way. Above and beyond that, there is the understanding that the root of all these phenomena, the source from which they all spring, is the mind. This ties in more with the Mahamudra approach. Madhyamaka and Mahamudra are examining the same thing from different points of view, and the Mahamudra approach tends to go one step further. The next and final step is to determine where that mind comes from. The discovery that a self-arising state of primordial awareness, one that goes beyond ordinary conceptual thought, is the approach of Dzogchen. To summarize, the source of suffering or clinging is some kind of self or ego. Through practice, we realize non-self, the lack of self-nature of body and mind. Then, in the Madhyamaka approach, we realize the emptiness of all phenomena. This completely uproots and dissolves all conflicting emotions that reside as deeply ingrained patterns in the ordinary person's mind. With this realization, all the passion and aggression, attachment and pride, jealousy, envy, and greed that are supported by clinging to self are dissolved, along with that notion of self. The next step is to discover mind as the source of all these phenomena and to realize the nature of that mind. The final step from the Dzogchen point of view is to discover the ground of being from which mind arises. This is often personified as the primordial Buddha Samattabhadra, or Kuntu Zengpo, which means all good or positive in every way. If we define the purpose of Dharma as the attainment of the state of peace, then this is the final or supreme state of peace that anyone can discover. It does not matter whether you are male or female, what race, what country. The only person who can prevent you from realizing this goal is you yourself. It is you who open the door and you who step inside of your own accord. Then it is you who follow the path right to the end. So then he concludes by saying, I would like to pass on one little bit of advice I give to everyone. Relax. Just relax. Be nice to each other. As you go through your life, simply be kind to people. Try to help them rather than hurt them. Try to get along with them. So some great advice from a great master of the tradition.